Good day. This is Doug Carlberg. I'm president of Carlberg Consulting Group and past chair of the San Antonio Manufacturers Association. Welcome to our series, Lead with Me on Leadership. Today, I'm lucky enough to have Richard Lebovitz. He is the founder of LeanDNA out of Austin, Texas. So he's going to share a little bit about his lean journey over the years and what his company is currently doing on how to manage your supply chain with AI. Welcome, Richard, to the series.
Excited to be here, Doug. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad to see you. Richard and I go back, 30, 35 years maybe. He started a company in Austin probably 35 years ago called Factory Logic. Right. And I was part of that startup in helping them get it implemented into factories. And it later was bought by SAP. Mm-hmm. And after SAP, I guess you got a little bored and eventually you formed the company LeanDNA today. But tell me how you got involved in lean early on. I know you studied in Japan.
Yeah, well, so I studied, my background's in mechanical engineering, computer science, and fortunately I got connected to manufacturing very early in my career. It wasn't necessarily what I had pursued from the very beginning in college, but I managed to get connected and I just fell in love with it. And then I ended up doing a startup out in the Bay Area, and with that startup there was an individual who actually had, worked in Japan. He had a lot of experience in some of the newer concepts coming out, and one of those was lean manufacturing. So when I was with that startup, I started to hear about it, got excited, and then through him, I got connected with the Japanese firm. I remember my first project was one out in Argentina to go work for Renault in the automotive industry, to go drive a big transformation, and knew almost nothing about lean at the time. So just read, got excited. And then when I went out there with the Japanese partners who became my partners, eventually, it just kind of changed my world, and I could see that this was kind of the future, and it brought together both, new strategy, things people weren't doing before, and something real like manufacturing, which was great.
Yeah, and you and I started about the same time. I came out of General Electric Company the same way. Started in engineering, put something on the floor, didn't work, got sent down to fix it, loved manufacturing, and never got off the floor. So it's a passion that we both have. So from there, tell me a little bit about how you got into Factory DNA.
Yeah. So what happened after, I was with the Japanese firm, we were working all over the world, and, really brilliant individuals, people that had worked with Shingo, came from Toyota, came from Honda. So they were kind of pioneers. And the story was from my Japanese partners that an email came in from, I think it was GKN over in Europe, that they wanted some help with this thing called Lean. And it went to JMA, and nobody wanted to go except my partner at the time, who was very young, was the first one to go lead. So he had been doing this early in his career, was teaching lean before people knew what it was pioneering a lot of methodology, but he wasn't one that spent his time writing books. He always believed it was all about doing it. So I got connected with him, and as we were working all over the world to implement lean, I was always thinking of my background in computer science and systems and looking at the great opportunity and what we were able to do through process, but starting to realize that systems can make a big impact. And so when we were doing things like, new ways to implement Kanban systems, or how do you schedule a factory? And it was a lot of new strategy, but the only way to execute it was some homegrown systems, custom software, even spreadsheets. I thought there had to be a better way. And through that, I started building the software while I was working with them. We then were able to get it to the point where we hired a team, scaled it up, and like you had mentioned earlier, Doug, eventually we got enough interest because we were able to get into some very large markets that SAP took notice and eventually acquired us. But it really came from kind of that passion for something new around lean, could see a problem, and I would say a lot of my career was always bringing together the understanding of the domain and what are you trying to achieve in manufacturing, with that understanding of systems and how to bring those two worlds together, where in my experience, there was a lot of people that really knew the strategy and the lean manufacturing, or the how do you improve manufacturing side of it, but they didn't really have that depth of knowledge in the systems. And so bringing those two worlds together have always been a personal passion, but I did it because I felt like, I was helping make the job and the work of these people easier. And a lot of times I felt like the people doing systems didn't really understand the domain. They would listen to what was needed and kind of quickly did something. And it wasn't really that depth of knowledge of what's the real problem, how do we solve it elegantly, how do we make sure it's sticky and people will use it? And that was always been kind of my passion.
Well, and there were a lot of tools in our toolbox early on. We had theory of constraints, that we looked at, and we really didn't even know what value stream mapping was initially. John Shook was the one that really brought that to the forefront, and trying to learn the Toyota production system, which they kept pretty much close to their chest. There's a lot of books out there today that you and I have both studied to get where we are today. Very, very early on, I also, when I was involved with you on Factory Logic, we found this organization called the Association for Manufacturing Excellence. Tell us about what you thought about that, because you eventually worked up and were on the board there for a while.
Well, I remember it was Tim Costello who kind of introduced me at the time, and didn't know much about it. But what I remember got my attention, got me excited was it was all these executives and leaders in manufacturing, first of all. So that was great. I mean, it wasn't, not that you want to work with all the different levels, but I knew that to drive transformation, it really starts at the top, right? You need to have people that understand and are passionate about what they're trying to do. So that was one thing about AME that got me excited, was it was a lot of leaders and the people doing the work, but it was showing that commitment at the leadership level that was, excited. The other thing was all volunteers, right? It was almost like...
It's like the San Antonio Manufacturers Association, a small staff and a lot of volunteers.
Yeah, and it was, I wouldn't say it's like a cult, but it was kind of exciting because it was these people that were leading this stuff at these massive companies that were volunteering their time. And it was apparent that they were doing it because there was like a mission, right? You hear about, it wasn't a job. It was like people believed in this mission to make manufacturing great, to take these new concepts and be competitive, make the work, easier for people, better work environment, creating the culture. And so you kind of combine this mission with this volunteerism, with this leadership. And it was like this combination. It's like, ooh, I want to be part of that. So as you mentioned, I got involved, early on, just kind of volunteering, putting on conferences with you. I remember a lot of the stuff that we did in Austin at the time was great. And then eventually becoming part of the board was even better, and actually eventually run the group was great. Yeah,
and eventually we got the conference to Dallas, and the international conference. We did one before COVID and one after COVID, and we actually came up with 40 plant tours. So we had to go up there and walk through all these factories and train them in what an AME tour is like, and various stages of lean. We had a rate, is it early on, advanced, medium, and really got a lot of great feedback on that. And what was interesting, and I go back in history, I was cleaning out some files. In 2013, Target Magazine from AME did an article on Richard, basically making competitive companies better. And you've been on this journey for quite a while.
I have. I know. Yeah, it's funny. It's great that you found that. I forgot all about that. I mean, I try to write more these days and put articles out there and trying to provide some thought leadership. And some of it is, I always felt like it's hard sometimes to know what to do, but if you can share what not to do, it's valuable too from a leadership perspective. So I think trying to share experiences, case studies, examples is great. And, there was always something about, that value that we found, especially starting early on in my career where you work in these big companies and you realize that making an impact doesn't take forever. I mean, you can do stuff quick, but it is very people dependent in culture, getting people on board, in terms of driving the transformation. It's, having enough of that strategy where you can kind of lead and set by example. And yeah, the journey's been a long one, but it's been great. And, when I look at kind of the bringing manufacturing back, I got to admit, it's kind of nice when you hear, it was nice 5 years ago when supply chain was in the news all the time. I mean, not that it was good what was going on, but it's nice to recognize the importance of it. And I would say now when you hear so much about manufacturing after so many years, and when I know AME's done a lot about reshoring and bringing it back. And I think there's always going to be the need to be global, right?
Oh, yeah.
But, just the importance of it. I did a piece recently in Forbes where I was talking about the manufacturing renaissance and how that's where these jobs are, and making things again is going to be so important to me, that's what was so exciting. I always remember walking through these factories and, whether it's, making chairs, you're walking through a factory in cars or moving down conveyors on assembly lines, like literally overhead where they're assembling cars. There was always something really, neat about that that's been a passion.
Well, it's interesting because in my past company, M2 Global Technology, we did a lot of work for Lockheed Martin and took my team over to Fort Worth. That factory's a mile long, and it's a moving line like a car line for an F-35 fighter. And the amount of lean techniques they've even played in the aerospace industry is pretty amazing. And so the stuff that was very crude initially has come so far. The other thing you got involved with, you and I are both AME examiners for their Excellence Award. Why did you want to get involved on that?
It was similar. I always find I learn a lot by seeing great things, right? That's the only way to learn. You have these experiences, you see great examples in factories. So I think that was part of it. I think it was also part of giving back. When I look at the contribution that AME made, I thought the AME Excellence Award, the fact that you're recognizing best practices, I just think it motivates people to become better. This is hard work. People that do it, working in factories, working to make factories great. It's not an easy job, and to help go out there and recognize it. In many cases, we were able to recognize great things and motivate people to do more of it, which was great. Even for those customers or companies that we visited where they didn't win the award, to go there and be able to be somewhat consultative, give guidance, here's what great looks like. And then I remember I think we went back the following year and they applied again and they really worked hard.
Won the second year.
Yeah. So it's kind of one of those things where you're recognizing great things, you're learning, you're sharing best practices, and then you're motivating people that really want to become great. Maybe they're not there this year, but then to see 2 or 3 years later, now they're winning, it's a great experience. And, being part of that and, continuing to motivate and to recognize those type of wins is great.
Oh, and AME's been a great organization and really helping people become very competitive. Let's circle back to your current company, LeanDNA. I mean, you started off with a few people, and right now you're up to 120 people, and you've taken it from just basically trying to interface the supply chain with the ERP systems or MRP systems to the next level with AI. Tell us about that journey.
Yeah, so after SAP acquired my last company, I immediately went back to work with my Japanese partners, and we were working on different projects at the time. And I was thinking about what's next. And obviously, my background's always on the manufacturing and the technology side. So I was looking at what's the opportunity around technology, and what led to LeanDNA was a real experience where I was working in a factory for probably had been a year and a half. We were creating a very modern production line, cellular manufacturing, pull systems, a mixed model assembly. And we spent so much time working on the efficiency of the physical manufacturing, but then we had issues with supplier and delivery. And you started to realize that, look, the understanding around lean and modern manufacturing had really taken hold, and we were part of that. I know you're part of it, but it went from like, what is this, to like everybody's doing it now. They had operational excellence groups. Everybody in manufacturing now was doing lean or some operational excellence initiative. But then you look at supply chain, you realize like it really hadn't evolved or changed. And so starting to really focus on the supply chain from a factory-centric point of view of how do you get the parts more aligned, the delivery where parts are coming in to the right place, the right time when you need them, was a real challenge. And people were always challenged to do it, but it was very manual, a lot of spreadsheet based, which I would say was okay. You could do it. What I could see happening, and I wouldn't say forecasting, but you could just see the trend of just mass customization, more options, more variety, the globalization. Like I was working in India, China, South America, all over the world. And you could see this dynamic where it wasn't like you had a factory with all these suppliers right next to you. It was increased complexity increased complexity with the globalization was just putting enormous pressure on supply chain. And so if it wasn't going to be dealt with properly, people are going to cover it like we talk about with waste, right? They were going to cover it with inventory. Like we're going to deal with this complexity, but more warehouses, more distribution centers, let's forecast better. But I didn't feel it was the right solution. And I felt like my background in manufacturing within the factory combined with the understanding of supply chain would provide kind of a unique opportunity to really rethink the way supply chain optimization and execution would exist. And that's kind of what led to LeanDNA, was really that realization, working in real factories, like, this is a real problem. And then when I looked at the solutions, it's all like spreadsheets, if anything. And so then we started building the software. We got our first customers, had huge results, got more customers. And we've always had, so now we're, very successful. I think we're in 30 plus countries, at least 500 plus manufacturing sites. And kind of the opportunity is, but starting at one. We start at one site and then quickly show the value and then expand from there. So I've always liked that I've always taken that strategy of putting a lot of pressure on us to not just do things or build software, but drive value, drive results. In fact, my team of customer success is what we call them. They're very focused on not only deploying the software, LeanDNA software, but are we getting the results that we would expect? And that's always been our philosophy. So when we started with one company, it was always that philosophy. Now that we're in hundreds, it's still that same kind of mentality. But that's how we got started.
And you're doing a lot in the aerospace. I know you're doing work for Bombardier and Airbus and a number of in the aerospace industry.
Yeah.
Which is very complex.
Yeah, and the interesting thing I started in automotive, as you know.
Oh yeah, with Ford.
Yeah, and what happened in the automotive was that you could see, that in the aerospace they started to see what automotive was doing in these industries. This is going back, 30 years ago. In aerospace was the first time I moved from like traditional automotive lean and all those suppliers to the aerospace. At the time, I remember it was when Boeing first started doing a moving line, and now, as Boeing was moving to lean and moving the line, all these suppliers are trying to understand how to catch up. And that's what got us involved. And then it's been exciting because you almost have to read. It's still the same methodology, same process, but very low rates, more complexity. But it's really helped me think through, how do you deal with these different kind of build models? So not everybody's going to be this kind of lean, daily rate, high volume, very short tack time production. It's going to be a lot of diversity, a lot of different build models. So going from aerospace to industrial products to automotive kind of gave me a perspective on how to deal with all these complexities in kind of a scalable way, which for me has been really helpful from a technology perspective.
Well, what's interesting, I think Toyota, especially Toyota of Texas, realized that, and they put 24 of their suppliers right on their campus connected with their plant down here, which is kind of unique. It's the first time they've done that. But even with that, you still need some type of software to connect all the dots to make sure you minimize your risk. Mm-hmm. So they've minimized the transportation, but they still have the other issues they got to address. What I'd like to do right now is, because you've gone through so much in leadership and this whole series on leadership, I've got a few questions in what you've learned over the years based on leadership. The first one, can you tell me about the time you had to lead through a crisis? What strategies did you use to guide yourself through it?
Yeah, and there's, being at startups, you're always dealing with issues, right? But I would say, COVID clearly was something that was, top of mind when you think about a crisis, because here we were, scaling our company, growing, but then COVID hit. And some of what I learned there is, one, be calm, and I think that calm is important for your teams to realize that, okay, we can deal with this. Then it's start thinking through a kind of a plan and a strategy and how we move forward. So those are a couple of ways I think about. It's always important to be calm, then start thinking through a strategy, and then over-communicate. Start thinking about how we communicate that strategy, pull people in to make them part of that. And with COVID, for us, it turned into something that was a real issue for everybody, obviously, in the world. But manufacturing was one of the first sectors that really came back and needed to come back, because it kind of speaks to what it is, right? I mean, people, when you think about lawyers and accountants, nothing against them, but it's not something you want or have to have, right? You need it's a service, but when you think about manufacturing goods and food and what manufacturing does, it's something that people need, right, to function. And so for it to come back quickly was a real challenge. So it's be calm, start to think through, how do we lead? We had remote work that was taking place. So how do you now you're thinking through leadership in a remote work environment. So with all that, taking place for me was really going back to my roots and things like Hoshin planning, goal deployment. I think it speaks to the power of that, which is like, one is be calm and come up with your strategy, but then start setting goals and making sure everybody knows whether they're working together. In the case of COVID, everybody's now remote. How do we have these goals and make sure everybody's aligned with these goals? And when you come in every day, you know what you got to do, and you know that what you're doing every day is aligned with what we have to achieve as a business. And then for me and my whole team as leaders, making sure that what those goals are aligned with what we're trying to drive as an overall business. And that kind of cascade up and down the Hoshin planning, the goal deployment, and the alignment was, I think, really key. And that was something I was able to really leverage in the crisis. And then you start thinking about kind of your daily stand-up meetings. People don't always realize, because now it's a big topic in a lot of startups and software, but that came from manufacturing, right? Because you come in, you got your stand-up meeting at 6 a.m. in a factory, and it's getting everybody on board. And now all these other industries use it, but it started in manufacturing. So it kind of speaks again to where I was able to face a crisis, but then go back to my roots in manufacturing and the strategy around lean, and then start to apply it. Yeah, apply it in software, apply it in the company, and that to me was the way I kind of manage, and then I manage it like that today.
And you're successful because of the result of it.
Yeah.
My next question is for you: what is the most significant risk you've taken in your leadership journey, and how did it turn out?
Significant risk, probably. It was probably my first startup. I didn't know it at the time, but I was at Frito-Lay, and I'd been there coming on a couple of years. I was always somewhat entrepreneurial, even in college and even before college. And I got this opportunity to go work for a startup out in the Bay Area, and super excited, quit my job, and I was doing well there, left, went to California by myself, drove there, took this little startup job, which was relatively small. And I don't know if it was really what the words that were truly said to me, but all I know is when I got there within a few weeks, all I remember is they told me that if I didn't close our first deal within 3 months, we'd shut you down. And I'm sure it wasn't like what he actually said, but that's how I took it.
Yeah.
And you can imagine, I quit, I had left my job. I'm there thinking, oh my gosh, if I don't do this. And I'll never forget, we closed our first deal in 3 months with Beatrice Hunt Wesson to do this peanut roaster control system. And I'll never forget it. But to me, when I look back at it, that's, to do that where you're early in your career, where a lot of people, and even I would tell my sons, don't do that. Don't take that risk, at least early on, get 2 years here, then get promoted, do another 2 years, and then take the risk, when you're later on in life and you have a lot more experiences, right? But to be somebody 2 years out of college, quitting your job, doing that, and that's what you hear to do a startup, it was, pretty risky, but it worked out great. And the team there, I learned a ton about how to not only deal with that type of risk and that type of shock personally to some degree, but how to overcome that, how to lay out a plan to go execute that plan, but also what does it mean to go sell and build a business around customers and those relationships that are important. How do you communicate a business problem? How do you not only understand the business problem, but then how do you come up with solutions to it? How do you build confidence with people that you can actually go solve it? And then when you get that commitment, you now got to go deliver. And how do you now work with your team that now you made the commitment to go deliver that and solve a pretty complicated problem? How do you now take a team to go address that? And we were doing really crazy stuff there. Nuclear magnetic resonance imaging of cheese. We were doing new biosensors, and this was all that first startup where eventually we were doing a lot of work with Stanford Research Institute. But that was like a really risky situation that I learned a ton from, that I've used my entire career afterwards.
It's amazing how you can add that to your toolbox. It's just amazing over time. I guess that's why you and I have all this long hair today.
I know. I did. I definitely had a lot more hair back then.
We both did.
Yeah.
As you look forward, what do you see as the greatest challenge for the next generation of leaders, and what advice can you give them?
Yeah, so there's a lot that's going on right now. I guess I can speak from my experiences, what I'm seeing right now. And I think obviously AI is top of mind. We just did a conference. We just spoke earlier today for SAM on this topic. And to me, that's changing a lot, if not everything. I wouldn't say everything, but it's going to change a lot. And it's not that jobs are going to go away. It's just jobs are going to change. And we fortunately have a lot of experience in manufacturing. We went through this with robotics and automation, where that was the concern, that if we start to automate the shop floor, we bring in all these robotics, everybody's thinking my job's going to go away. But the fact is, no, it's just your job's going to change. And I would argue change for the better, because people that were drilling a hole with the drill, right, manual drill, are now learning how to program a CNC machine. People that were cleaning the floors and making sure the environment was clean are now becoming maintenance technicians for advanced robotic or automation machines. So jobs are going to change. So I think for leaders, especially in this environment, it's really going to require like the same leadership skills I think everybody's aware of, but it's also going to be necessary to have a more technology strong acumen of what does this really mean for me? In other words, if these changes truly do happen and the workforce changes, and you need to both adopt it to be competitive, but you also need to know how you need to adopt it for your workforce, right? So you're dealing with, what does this mean for my teams, but also I'm dealing with my competitors, right? So leaders are going to have to really understand the technology and what does this mean for the workforce. They're going to need to be able to be very adept at building out plans now of how do you drive transformation. So I think it's going to require what I say is real, true, strong leadership of technology knowledge, strategy. How do you drive transformation? Because there's going to be a lot of transformation. I think that's going to be important. I think you need to be, I would say salesman, but when I started my first start of 35 years ago, I had to sell, and then I started my second one, I had to sell, and then I find that you're selling to your customers, but you're not selling to your teams, but you're communicating the excitement of where you're headed and your passion. So with transformation that I think is going to take place, you're going to need a combination of things, technical acumen around AI. You're going to need to be able to lay out a plan strategically, so be a strategic thinker. And I think you're going to need to be able to drive transformation, which I think is like passion and how do you bring people along. So for me, I would say this technology shift is going to drive a transformation that's going to need leaders to kind of maybe rethink what they would do in a more stable, traditional environment, where I haven't seen a shift like this in 30 years. I know we were talking about earlier with the internet and stuff like that.
Early on.
Yeah.
That was the shift back then, and we're seeing it now.
Yeah.
But it's exponentially going a lot quicker, I can tell you.
Yeah, and it's exciting with what it can do. And I'm living it firsthand. I'm working with the technology. We're building product around this firsthand. So it's pretty amazing what's going to happen. I think it's going to challenge leaderships in a good way, because the opportunity is to create a better company, a more competitive company, a workforce that's excited. You could take jobs like in supply chain where we work, they don't want to be chasing emails every day. They don't want to be on calls all the time trying to explain part shortages. They don't actually want to do that, but they have to do that because of technology. If we can evolve that to where now they can be more strategic, they could be thinking about being more proactive and predictive, so they're not having to be firefighting all the time. It's going to be a huge change for workers, just like automation was in the manufacturing environment. So that's just my personal experience, but to me, it's a great thing. But there's going to require leadership skills to kind of deal with what could be a very different environment than it was even 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Well, I tell you, these were 3 great takeaways that everybody can put in their toolbox that you shared with us today. Here again, the series is Lead With Me. We had Richard Lebovitz today, and from LeanDNA. I keep going back to Factory Logic. It's a bunch of history with Richard and myself, but a great series. He did do a special interest group presentation, and it will be up on the San Antonio manufacturing website along with this podcast today, or you can reach it up on my podcast and the podcast I've done before at www.carlbergcg.com. Thank you so much today for coming, Richard.
Thank you, Doug. Pleasure to be here.
You got it.
Thank you.